made. And I would challenge anybody to alight on a country, not just in Africa, but in the whole world, that has made as much progress as Rwanda has in the last 10 years. So I think the first thing is I want to congratulate and thank President Kagame and his team for the huge progress that has been made here, which is a beacon, an exemplar for other countries, not just on this continent, but elsewhere in the world. The second point I just want to make initially is to build on the point that Paul Hinks made in the earlier panel, which is that Africa is all too often talked about as though it was one homogeneous country. It is a vast and complex and diverse continent, 54 different countries with different histories, different speeds of economic development, different tribal backgrounds and histories. And anybody wanting to invest in Africa needs to understand and educate themselves about those differences and the different ways of doing business in the different African countries, and indeed in some of the large African countries, different regions of those countries. And just as African entrepreneurs and African governments treat British investors, French investors, American investors, Dutch investors, German investors differently, so we should treat African countries and African entrepreneurs and African governments differently and respond to their priorities as we invest in the specific African countries. But the really good news is that I agreed with the comments of the panel earlier, that there is a wall of money looking to invest on the African continent. No longer just the private equity houses, who all tend to chase the same 1,100 African corporates, pushing the price up and the return down. But also now there is a significant wall of money looking for debt opportunities, both sovereign debt, as sovereign debt finance houses are looking to chase yield, as yields are so low in Europe and the US, but also looking to finance municipal bond issuance, so creating local governments in Africa with their own resources as well as the centre, and in addition to that, looking for corporate debts as well.
Thank you so much. Dr. Yusuf, maybe I will take you back to your days in the IMF. During that time, Africa relied a lot on foreign aid, and especially the loanings from the IMF and the reforms. However, when you became the minister, you actually steered the economy towards making it more liberal and attracting investments. What is it that provoked you into looking at Africa as an opportunity for investment that is being looked at today?
Well, look, first, I agree with what Mark said a minute ago. Africa is a very diverse collection of countries, of habits, of governance issues, principles, and ways to do business. But also, Africa is one country. I often start my talk to foreign investors about Africa by saying Africa is not a country. Well, in some respects, Africa is. And the key to Africa's progress is what many African countries today are discovering, is to let market forces loose. Open up the economy, let market forces operate, do whatever it is they do, bring supply and demand in equilibrium, and address the side effects. There are side effects to these, to the free operation of market forces that we have to address. When the exchange rate needs to adjust, like in a number of countries now that are experiencing commodity price collapses, oil producers and others, don't keep it from doing that. In Egypt, we went through this several times, 3-4 times under my tenure. Every time the natural reaction is block the exchange rate. Don't let it move, it will harm the poor. Immediately we find the black market that crops up. Okay. And the black market affects prices the same way as the official rate would have had you let it move, except it doesn't allow the system to change, and it doesn't allow the system to adapt. The result, you have a fictitious issue that you are supposedly protecting the poor while harming them more by keeping the economy from adjusting. My belief is that African countries are beginning gradually to discover this. The problems that Egypt faced and is still facing today are a magnified version of the problems of every African country. We're an African country, we're 90 million, and we have all of the problems of all African countries magnified. We went through, at least in my tenure, I went through all the mistakes that many of my finance colleagues will make. I went through all of the solutions, some worked, some didn't. I find at the end that the only solution that works is to let market forces operate. In all respects, there are income distributional issues. We can address them.
Thank you.
There are social networks, social safety net issues that need to be addressed. We can address them, but never through blocking the operation of market forces. And I think Africa has discovered the solution. It is a matter of time before more and more countries start applying this and more countries start discovering the prosperity that Egypt found. We went from a growth rate of 2.5% per year to 7.5%, from foreign direct investment of 500 million a year to 13 billion. The minute we opened up, let the exchange rate move, let interest rates move, let prices find their equilibrium, and protect the poor at the same time.
Thank you so much. Governments of those listening, good tips from him. Francis, in our earlier session, maybe you never got time to really tell us. You were only welcoming us here. Now, let's hear from you. As we are saying Africa is the base, why do you say that the better place to do business is Rwanda? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And once again, what a pleasure to host you in our country and to host the Global Africa Investment Summit. We are truly honored to have you. Why Rwanda? There are two lessons that we have learned in a decade of implementing business reforms. One is that most of the business reforms that we've been carrying out that have reduced the transaction cost for business entry, for starting a business, for getting established, and for running a business, have, for the most part, benefited small and micro enterprises. And that was very revealing because in the beginning, actually, people thought that business reforms and reducing transaction costs would benefit a lot more the big ticket item types of FDI from the international financial centers. The second lesson that we have learned was that while that is important for everyone, the big ticket item types of FDI flows into our country often care a lot more about production cost, about markets, and about efficiency of distribution systems into the wider consumer markets, not just Rwanda, but the EAC. And so what that has taught us is that the largest flow of what is actually FDI, but regional FDI, tends to be small ticket entrepreneurs that are coming from within the region, often that start as traders, but eventually stabilize and become investors. What that means for us is that investors from within our region are very, very important addition to the domestic investors. And so we have gone out of our way to identify and incentivize investors from EAC, from COMESA, and SADC. In fact, when you look at the backbone of some of the businesses in the services sector, whether it's in financial services sector, whether it's in consultancy services, or even in the hospitality services sector, many of these people have come from the region by identifying the opportunities in the market and eventually establish here. And so some people may have come initially as management consultants in the hotel business that now have started gourmet restaurants in the city, that now have acquired savings and acquired financing to start boutique hotels and backbones of the hospitality industry. Now, all that said, we are realizing that as a country reforms and makes business climate very conducive and attractive, in the end, it's up to the region. A country alone cannot be sufficient for attracting the big ticket types of FDI. And so for us, we see the trade barriers and removal of these trade barriers and expansion of the market into the ESC and wider tripartite free trade area as very critical for the continued attraction of FDI into our region. Now, We are also working with our colleagues, particularly in the ESC region, to work collectively in attracting FDI so that it's convenient for every investor in each of the respective countries to know that as they establish in one country, they have a market in the other, and that they have the support of the other regulatory systems for their operations and sales in that region. So two lessons that are very critical, but which continue to make Rwanda an important place for doing business.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Small tickets matter. And on that note, Madam Tinelo, you have done a great job in Nigeria, addressing the bottom of the pyramid in the pension fund in a contributory framework, raising funds to billions of shillings. First, what do you have to say about the small tickets that is just mentioned here, being a drive towards investments? Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. And again, I need to thank His Excellency, President Kagame, for hosting this and giving a beacon of hope for the rest of Africa. It's not the challenges that assail you, but what you do with them afterwards that counts. The contributory pension system in Nigeria is one of the big success stories Nigeria has recorded, simply because there has been a consistent approach to both the implementation, the policy-driven, and the support and political will to see it through. We started from a 2 trillion naira deficit of unpaid pension and people dying in queues because they didn't get their pension reforms, and transformed to a privately managed system where you have individual accounts belonging to those who contribute a percentage of their salary, and then all these amounts are privately managed by the pension fund administrators, and the funds are held by the pension fund custodians, and all of these are regulated by the Pension Commission. And this framework is enshrined in law. So as it were, we have forced savings so that people take responsibility for their retirement benefits. And 12 years down the line of this, what we have now is over 5 trillion naira in pension fund assets, all well regulated, all invested in a transparent manner. And more importantly, the individuals who contribute, I think there are about 7 million now, or slightly more than 7 million now of retirement savings account holders, have in their individual accounts, they can keep a record of what they are investing, what their employers are investing on their behalf, and it is all transparently done. But to go back to your questions about the small tickets matter, what we have, these successes we have recorded are only mostly in the formal sector. The informal sector in the Nigerian space is not yet been addressed, and that is what we've embarked on with the micro pension scheme, and that is to catch the bulk of the working class citizens in Nigeria who do not belong to a formal setup. I don't think it's something we can walk away from and claim to have had a reform that excludes at least 60% of the working class. And as difficult as it is to bring this sector of people under the contributory pension system, it's something we have embarked on and created various incentives, different sets of rules for them, so that those who are in the informal sector, and that includes the entrepreneurs, that includes the SMEs, that includes all of those who are working for themselves, to have a chance to be covered by this scheme. And for us, that also assists them in growing and migrating from SMEs to bigger companies, because the corporate governance issues that you require before you can be pension compliant means that you have to set up a bigger structure and work towards entrenching the issues that you need to, so that your individual companies can stand the test of any kind of scrutiny. And what we find now in Nigeria is that the pension reform has found itself intertwining with a lot of other agencies, the small, medium enterprise agency in Nigeria, the Bank of Industries, the Central Bank, the SEC. What we're doing is making sure that you cover the whole gamut of the working population while producing a platform that people can invest and receive cover for their old age.
Thank you so much. Bottom line is formalizing the informalities that exist at the bottom. Mr. Toro Orero, Silicon Valley funding. So glad that you've become a global trotter. It is still young, but with value. What is it that we in Africa, you among us, need to address when we are looking at the finances that are available within your framework, and especially for the startups, among them, majority who are youth? Welcome.
Thank you. Oh, is this on?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just...
You're on.
Okay, fantastic.
Your mic is on.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, thanks. Much better.
Okay.
So, yeah. So first of all, I'm African, original Nigerian, so yeah, I'm not like American, some American guy. So we invest in the tech startup space. Just to give you a background, we've invested in as a network in startups like Tesla and Hotmail and Skype and Baidu, and many big companies have 7 billion globally on management. And last year we looked at African spaces, the next, of course, the frontier, all the buzzwords, etc. For the tech startup scene, the tech startups, which is where we specialize in, we see a common thread, and I'd like to encourage this. First is the ease of doing business, and that goes beyond registering a business. That goes to enforcing a contract, and that could make or mar investor confidence in the region. So, an investor wants to invest in X country, for example. There's no problem. Loves the entrepreneur, loves the business model, loves the local market, but he's thinking, or she's thinking, if something goes wrong, will this piece of paper we just signed be enforced?
Okay.
So investor confidence. The second thing is from the entrepreneur point of view, we, I think, are awesome people. And I usually try to encourage tech startups to think global. So Rwanda, for example, is an awesome place. We'd like startups to... Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, this is my first time in Rwanda. I think I am blown away. But we see that the difference in Silicon Valley and here is Silicon Valley startups tend to think global from day one. So it's how can we change the world? We just happen to be based in Silicon Valley. And I think those are some of the things we can adopt to this part of the world. So it's how can we change the world? We just happen to be based in Rwanda. We just happen to be based in Ghana or whatever country. So having the global approach from day one it changes how you view your business, even if it's a local problem. So thinking about changing the local country, scaling that continentally, and potentially scaling that globally. The third thing is the belief. That's what I kind of see. I think I shared briefly with a friend I just met here. We can do anything we set our minds to, and I think we're already having those trajectories right now where we just have to leap and just do. There's a great definition of an entrepreneur that Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, says, that I share this a lot. He says an entrepreneur is someone that, first of all, how many people have gone skydiving? I have. Skydiving, anyone? Woo, yeah. An entrepreneur is someone that builds, that jumps off a plane and builds a parachute on the way down. So having that aggressive, non-risk averse approach to both the investment side of the equation, okay, and both the business building side of the equation, I think can create something special.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Right Honorable Mark, you can set you to do what you plan to do. That was his quote. You have been drilling Africa in terms of investments, and especially right now you're consulting quite widely for various firms, especially in financial inclusion for Africa. President Kagame has mentioned here that if we would address time, we would bridge the gap between the developed and the developing. From those two experiences, what would you advise us, and especially the government agencies who are listening, to how we need to attract the investors?
I think there are there are three fundamental tenets in response to that question, building on the point that President Kagame was making this morning. The first was the point he made about good governance. And it might sound straightforward, but it's very important. It's no coincidence that there is a significant difference between the capital city of Rwanda and the capital city of Burundi next door. That is down to good governance. And that is going to become ever increasingly important, as Francis was saying, as regional integration accelerates. So it will no longer just be enough to have good governance in your country. You'll need to ensure that there's good governance in the countries that are part of the regional integration network as well, which means that the situation in South Sudan, in Burundi, as we've seen recently in Gabon on the other side of Africa, could well have a detrimental impact to the investment coming into that particular region where that country is focused. So it's incumbent on those African governments that have good governance to ensure that their compatriots and colleagues in other countries are doing the same. The second is the rule of law, the point that you were absolutely correctly making. Contracts must be sanctified, they must be honoured, and I come across all the time, and it's not particularly peculiar to Africa, but around the world, where governments sign contracts, then don't honour those contracts in terms of payment later on. And it may have been done by previous governments, and the current government may not like it, but that's a significant issue, particularly when investors look at the history and performance of previous countries. So the rule of law, and the other issue that's very important with that is, of course, disputes. One of the facets that my ex-boss, the ex-Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, David Cameron, used to say when investors came to the UK was that if you invest in the United Kingdom and you fall out with the UK government and you take the UK government to court, you as the investor are very likely to win. That gives the investor huge confidence in investing in a particular jurisdiction. And the third and a very important facet, briefly, is economic and political stability. Stability is absolutely essential for giving confidence to investors to put money into a particular country. And that means certainty of taxation regimes, not changing taxation architecture at the drop of a hat when the Treasury is short of money, making sure that investors can plan to make sure that their investment is sustainable going forward. But also at the same time, making sure that whilst the investor gets a fair return on capital, that the Africans in that country also benefit as well.
Thank you very much. Dr. Yusuf, you were nodding as Honorable Mark was speaking. From your experience, your vast experience and exposure in public finance, how would you address the changes in government and especially the areas he has addressed? What advice do you have for us today? Any missing link? What do we need to do? And especially, how should governments address SMEs who are there in terms of your financial knowledge in governance?
Look, Mark has put in all of the essential elements of a country being attractive to investors. One element that I would add is predictability, in the sense that investors hate surprises. There may be changes in exogenous factors, changes in environment. Commodity prices go up, commodity prices go down. The investor has to know that there is a predictable mechanism that is going to reflect these changes into the economy. So again, I go back to my point. Originally, let market forces operate. Make sure they operate efficiently, but let market forces operate. There is nothing that brings comfort to an investor more than knowing that when there's going to be a scarcity of some product or some issue of foreign currency, that the exchange rate is going to move up. Or that when there is a shortage of money, that the interest rate is going to move up. The predictability element is crucial. You can have a stable economy, but the basic mechanisms inside are not known. They're opaque, obscure. The investor worries about this because he knows that when something changes, he won't be able to predict what's going to happen to the domestic economy. Now, coming to SMEs. SMEs are a very particular issue that is often neglected in our countries. I, in my tenure as finance minister, initially fell into that trap. We are so obsessed by attracting foreign direct investment, we're so obsessed by the large corporations that are interested in our countries that we tend to forget that the main systemic feature of our economies are SMEs, that the vast majorities of enterprises generating jobs in our economies are SMEs. And these have specific requirements in terms of macro policy. For one, you must make sure that you always maintain their competitiveness. It's difficult to get labor productivity up at the SME level. It takes education, infrastructure, logistics, etc. It is easier if you have a watch on your relationship with the rest of the world, namely your exchange rate. The exchange rate can maintain the competitiveness of most enterprises in the economy, but crucially of SMEs. Second, on a macro scale, you have to worry about financial intermediation. SMEs have little or no access to financial intermediation. It's difficult for them to get loans. It's difficult for them to get financing. It's difficult for them to transfer money from one place to another. We usually tend to neglect this. Banks are not interested. SMEs are laborious. There's a lot of paperwork. There are often no assets to guarantee the loans, and they're not interested. We, as governments, should concentrate on developing the financial intermediation that addresses itself to SMEs. Finally, taxes. Very often, one of the main goals of governments, and all of our governments, and a very laudable goal, is to bring the informal sector into the formal economy. For, among other reasons, have them start paying taxes. Well, we have to start a principle, which I discovered at my own expense. SMEs are not a source of tax revenues. SMEs, especially the S part, SMEs are a source of employment. You have to give them room to grow. You have to give them room to come into the official fold without telling them that as soon as you're in the official fold, you have to pay taxes. Come into the official fold. Formalize your relationship. Formalize your relationship with the financial sector. Then, when you grow, when you reach a certain minimum size, we'll start talking about taxes. This is a mistake that many African governments make. Wanting to formalize the informal sector, they immediately get them under the tax umbrella. It's a mistake. We should get them in first, get them to grow, get them to accept the existence of a formal economy, the requirements of a formal economy. Then we start talking about taxes. That, with a development of financial intermediation, will help create a more inclusive growth. The trickle-down phenomenon. When SMEs have access to financing, when SMEs have access to the formal economy, it will promote inclusive growth. It will promote the distribution, the establishment of a social safety net. When you, in one way or another, push the citizens of your country each to have a bank account, that immediately gives you an immediate access to them should you want to extend a social safety net to them. So these are just three of the principles that are more salient for us to be able to address the main systemic building block of our economies, which are SMEs. In the last 5 or 6 years after the financial crisis, we discovered institutions that were too big to fail. SMEs are too numerous to fail. If we let them fail, we let our economies fail.
Good one, good one, good one. Francis, maybe as we wrap up, a lot has been said, good ones, about the position of investors in Rwanda. You have established a one-stop shop for the investors in Rwanda. What recourse do we as investors have when that one-stop fails? Not just for this scenario, not for your case, but especially for the region. Now that there is regional integration to enhance that the level playing ground for all investors is well uniformized, what recourse do we have as governments towards addressing us when we are unable to get it right?
The one-stop shop, which is essentially what my organization, Rwanda Development Board, is about, it's really to reduce the transaction costs and make sure that all or most majority of any interaction between government and a business can be done at one place at once. But still that has its own limitations, especially with respect to the small and micro enterprises, which is really the starting point of businesses. The one-stop shop is very effective for businesses that are formal, that are growing, that are strong, that are already capable of interacting into the formal structures of government. But what we are talking about here are the small entrepreneurs that are beginning to shape a business at very early stages, often where they are putting in their personal savings or family savings and are trying to bet on the optimistic side. What we are realizing is that at that very early stage, the first 1 to 2 years of operation are the most critical. Because after they have put their savings into a business, they must translate this into a product that is actually able to be commercialized and to generate revenues. Often that's where the essence of time is very critical that President Kagame was talking about. Because you see, any delay in that process can very easily turn the entrepreneur who had put their life savings into a business all of a sudden into a poor family. That's where we have a facility here in Rwanda that provides the kind of backup so that any financing that is required by the small enterprise can be insured by this facility, so that even if they were not able to pay, at least 80% of the capital that they have put in, especially that they have borrowed, is insured to be returned. That allows them to all of a sudden become attractive to the formal financial services. And this is where, for me, I think the FDI comes in, because you see, there is a skewness in our markets where essentially in most markets, equity is more expensive than debt. It's always understood that when you put in your personal savings or money into a business, you should expect higher return than the banks which are financing debt. The reverse is the case in many of our markets, such that entrepreneurs are forced to put in more and more of their savings than to borrow from the banks because it's more costly to borrow. And so any time delay in repayment of the debt that they have borrowed can all of a sudden collapse their businesses. As you know, the function of money value is time. And so time becomes very, very critical. So what we see is that at the time when a business is to move from the micro to the more medium enterprise that requires additional capital, we need to be getting more equity into these businesses than debt, particularly debt that is being provided through commercial banks. And that's where the FDI can become very instrumental because of the structural nature of our commercial banks that make it difficult to provide affordable debt into businesses. And the link between FDI and the small medium enterprises, that critical transition from small micro to medium, is very important. This is where we come in as the Rwanda Development Board to try and interest many of the private equity and venture funds and some of the social enterprise investors really to come in to support these businesses so that they can make that next transition to actually more market-facing, robust and resilient companies that can resist some of the turbulence of the market.
Would the same scenario be replicated in the region?
There is no question about it. In fact, what is happening here in Rwanda, I don't believe is particularly unique. Given the similarities that our economies have, and in fact, given that most of the entrepreneurs are leveraging the wider regional markets, there is a lot of similarities in our economies, in our banking sectors, in the nature of businesses that people are starting. Let's face it, majority of our entrepreneurs are either in the trade-related services or in agribusinesses. Now we are getting increasingly more that are getting into high-tech that are innovative in the technology space, but essentially majority are either in trade-facing or agribusinesses, and that's similar across the board. Now, what we are also seeing is that they tend to move where they are seeing more facilitation. In fact, when you see I'll try and be unmodest. When you see the kind of reforms that this country, Rwanda, has been putting in place, making it easy to do business, whether it's domestic or regional international businesses, it has attracted many of the SMEs from the region, from Uganda, from Kenya, Tanzania, from DRC, Burundi, and others. And many have come in more specialized sectors, and it's the interaction with the domestic entrepreneurs that has caused the kind of dynamism we are seeing in various sectors that are causing growth to be sustainable within our economy.
Thank you. I can vote for that. I come from Kenya, and it's true that your attraction is quite welcoming. On the line, Madam, on the line of safety nets, especially on what he has touched on, life-saving investments losing out. With the pension fund and the $20 billion US dollar under a well-regulated and controlled framework, how would you relate that to becoming an opportunity for partnerships for us, the investors, vis-a-vis the small pensioners who have been captured in your data?
I think the main issue is that foreign direct investment obviously would have to do their due diligence. And what we have seen across the board is what is not easily understood is immediately rated as high risk. And that in itself makes an investment decision for or against based on what is considered high risk. Now, the pension funds, especially that of Nigeria, who has increasingly become one of the largest institutional investors, are by law required to make investments that are not only safe, but also yield enough returns to be able to meet the rising liabilities of the pension payouts as and when due. And the direct link, obviously, is if I were a foreign direct investment looking to invest in a country like Nigeria, I would look for an institutional investor like the pension funds, because part of the things that you would consider high risk are already things that the funds, by nature of their regulations, have done the due diligence on. And they are also clear in their minds what constitutes a real risk rather than a perceived one, because they have the skin in the game, they are local, and they are collecting their investments from the people and also investing for the people, for the country, and sometimes even if they go outside of the country, it is ultimately to the beneficiaries of the pension funds. So I think in that instance, it creates a natural synergy for investors to look for not just the Nigerian pension funds, because what we are also doing in Nigeria is to create a platform where all of Africa is talking together and promoting what we have seen that has worked in Nigeria, being the contributory pension system. In fact, at the end of the month, we're going to have an African Pension Awards, because we have invited entries from all across of Africa, those who are doing innovative things in their pension management, and even those who are not necessarily doing the contributory pension scheme, they have also done things that are worthy of emulation. And once you start that platform of knowledge sharing across of Africa, you will find that the pension funds are inevitable resource for domestic financing that you can leverage on for both infrastructural investment across the board, power, real estate, all across the board. And that, in my opinion, is one of the critical areas where we can bridge this seeming disconnect between those who have funds to invest and they're looking for where to invest and how to invest that safely.
Lovely. You know, at least you know the areas of entry now. Toro, maybe before we do a final cut-line statement, what do foreign investors look for, especially in startups? Tell us, tell the young guys here.
All right. I think usually it
tends to depend on the investment thesis of that particular fund or angel or private equity play, wherever it is. Also the fund, we look for entrepreneurs that are daring, the more impossible a task seemingly is to normal people, the more excited we get. So I'll give you an example. So when we invested in Elon Musk, for example, and he wants to take man to Mars, who takes man to Mars, right? Who thinks about that? And we're like, boom, let's do it. And right now, SpaceX is, they have their challenges, but they're on the cusp of revolutionary technology and doing great things. So first of all, we look for people that think really big. Second of all, we look for things that are locally relevant and globally scalable. And I think, speaking about local relevance, I had a little chat to it. Someone I met sat down by on the table, talking about social impact, and we define almost every type of business as social impact, because with a business comes jobs, like you said, and with jobs comes spending power and empowerment, etc. And then you can multiply that and scale across different entrepreneurs, different regions. The other thing we look for is a solid business model. We have seen that it has to be very unique to the place where the idea has been born. So usually copy and paste tends not to work. Like you said, many people think Africa is a country, but 52 different countries with different regulations, legislations, the way consumer behaviors, etc. So we look for startups or founders that have unique insights into that market, that region, those business models that apply to those specific markets. Yeah.
Thank you. Before we take our parting shot, we could have the plenary have 2 mics, just in case there's that question. But meanwhile, Francis, your parting shot, what is it way forward? Let's go on as we get the mics to the plenary.
It's my view. It's my view that as people deliberate on regional integration, it will always be the citizens, particularly private sector, that will drive the process. It will not be the political leaders, despite the demonstrated goodwill. When you look at already the movement of people across borders, trading, or whether in goods or in services, when you look at the movement of people across borders seeking employment and opportunities, you are seeing a region that is ripe for regional integration, that is demanding it, that is actually demonstrating that it's possible. When you look at businesses in any of our countries that are seeking talent across borders within the region, you are seeing already a demonstration of regional integration through businesses that will only be formalized by the political processes of what already is happening in the business space. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Yusuf?
Well, a very short statement. Africa today is China in 1981. You do the math.
Accurate.
Get that? Okay. Yes, Madam Chinela.
I think the parting shot will be that in as much as we're seeking foreign direct investment and investments from across everywhere, the problems of Africa can only be solved by Africans. And we have to bear that in mind. And once that happens, we're well on the way to where we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Honorable Mac.
Just 2 very brief points at the end. The first is that governments are there to create the environment and the architecture for businesses and the private sector to thrive. The point that Francis was making was absolutely right. But there is a difference between governments that put in place good architecture and governments that put in place bad architecture or don't implement the architecture that they want. And that has a very significant impact. The The second point I just want to make is the importance of due diligence, building on the point that you were making. It's absolutely essential, not just for the inward investor to understand who their partners are, where they're linked to, whether they've got the capital that they say they've got, but it's important that the host government understand who's investing in their country. And I don't think yet there's enough of that taking place in Africa. And that's creating all sorts of problems of people who are moving capital through financial systems and effectively laundering money through African countries who shouldn't be. And that needs to be reduced significantly. And the final point I just want to make, if I may, is that doing business in Africa is all about relationships. Focus on building those relationships, and it does take time.
Thank you. Parting shots.
Yeah, so, okay, is this working? I don't know. So my parting shot will be for us as investors to have an entrepreneurial mindset and to embrace risk, because like she said, risks is the definition of risk is very relative, and to be in this part of the world, we need to embrace risk and jump in. So whatever we're investing in, kind of unlearning what we think risk is and just adapting to the local situation and forging ahead with that. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, my panel members and the delegates. In view of time, we're sorry we may not be able to have your question answered now, but we are going to be around. So be very free to interact with us anytime, even in other sessions. And especially because this information is likely to be repeated in many other sessions. So for now, we thank you so much for listening to us, and Africa is a place to be. Thank you very much. My name is Patrick Mwangi, CEO of Micro and Small Enterprise Authority in Kenya, a government agency that creates environment for the informal or the micro and small enterprises towards them becoming big businesses. Thank you so much.
That was a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Oh, crap.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Lots of insights.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going tomorrow.
So we'll have a chat.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm going
Francis.
tomorrow.
Hello. There we go. Right, ladies and gentlemen, a big hand.
Are you around the next couple of days? I'd love to have a quick chat with you.
Yes, a big hand to Patrick, who's been selling the small business in Kenya.
ngira ngo rero uko mukomeje kurikirana session yari igiyemo session ya kabiri ikurikiye ya mu gitondo yahuje rero abamukuru w'igihugu cy'u Rwanda ndetse na mugenzi we wa Uganda ndetse n'abandi banyacyubahiro batandukanye bateraniye ahangaha. Session ya kabiri rero ikaba yareberaga hamwe uko ubukungu bwo mu karere hamwe n'inganda ntoya n'iziciriritse byatezwa imbere, uburyo ibitekerezo bizima byiza bishobora guterwa inkunga maze ubukungu bwa Afrika bukarushaho gutera imbere. Nanone bakaba barebeye hamwe uko barwiyemezamirimo mu bihugu bya Afrika ndetse n'abarwiyemezamirimo mpuzamahanga tusigana no ku isi bashobora gukorera hamwe muri environment nziza kugira ngo barusheho kuzamura ubukungu bwa Afrika. Nanone bakaba barebeye hamwe icyo Afrika yakora kugira ngo abashoramari mpuzamahanga bashobore kumenya amahirwe ahari, ariko amahirwe ahari kugira ngo nayo agerweho nuko abanza gushyirwaho ibikorwa remezo birambye nuko byakomeje garukaho guhera muri session ya mu gitondo. Nanone bakaba barebeye hamwe ingamba leta za Afrika bashobora gufata mu guteza imbere ishoramari, banakangurira by'umwihariko abashoramari hirya no hino ku isi ko hari ingamba runaka zikarishye zishobora gufatwa, akanone bagaruka ku cyo umukuru w'igihugu yagize kuvuga kare ko nanone badakwiye kujejeka umuntu wishe akazi, uburyo bashobora kumufatira ingamba cyangwa se ibihano kugira ngo ibyo yiyemeje gukora bigerweho. Nanone ahangaha Maximum akaba yashimiye byimazeyo umukuru w'igihugu intambwe u Rwanda amaze gutera mu kwiyubaka nyuma ya jenoside yakorewe Abatutsi ndetse n'urugamba rwo kubura igihugu narwo rwagenze. Bakaba bashimiye umukuru w'igihugu by'umwihariko byimazeyo ko amaze guteza imbere kino gihugu cyacu, ndetse Francis Gatare we akaba yavuze ko igihugu cyonyine ubwacyo ntabwo gishobora nanone kugira icyo kigeraho kitafatanyije hamwe n'ibindi bihugu byo muri Afrika Afrika bati gushyira hamwe rero nicyo cy'ingenzi gishobora gufasha ibihugu bya Afrika kugira ngo birusheho gutera imbere munyemerero duhimira ahangaha ino session ya kabiri ibaye ubwo RB irakomeza rero kubakurikirana uko iyi nama kwiga ku bukungu bwa Afrika izakomeza ibira